Welcome back to the Ghastly Journal, where the shadows whisper secrets that should have stayed buried. Today's tale will make you question every warning you've ever ignored, every family secret you've dismissed as mere superstition. This is a story about inheritance, not of money or property, but of something far more sinister. A story about the weight of family curses and the terrible price of curiosity. The call came on a Tuesday morning, cutting through my coffee-induced haze like a blade through silk. Aunt Margaret was dead. Heart failure, they said, quick and painless. But as I stood in the doorway of her Victorian house 3 days later, keys heavy in my palm, I wondered if anything about Margaret Thornfield had ever been quick or painless. The house loomed before me like something from a Gothic novel, its weathered gray shingles and wraparound porch, speaking of an era when secrets were kept behind lace curtains and proper ladies wore gloves to hide their sins. 3 stories of bay windows and gingerbread trim, with a tower room that seemed to watch the street with the patient malevolence of a predator. Margaret had lived here alone for 43 years, ever since Uncle Harold disappeared during one of his archaeological expeditions to South America. The police had given up searching after 6 months. Margaret never remarried, never spoke of dating, never even kept so much as a cat for company. I pushed open the front door and the smell hit me immediately. Lavender and mothballs, with something underneath that I couldn't quite identify. Something metallic and old, like pennies left too long in a pocket or the taste of blood when you bite your tongue. The house was exactly as I remembered from my childhood visits. Dark mahogany furniture that seemed to absorb light, oil paintings of stern-faced relatives whose eyes followed you as you moved, and doilies on every surface like spiderwebs spun by some particularly domestic arachnid. But now, without Margaret's commanding presence, it felt hollow, like a theater after the final curtain call. The entrance hall stretched before me, dominated by a grandfather clock that had stopped at 11:47. Whether morning or evening, I couldn't tell. The wallpaper was that particular shade of burgundy that Victorians seemed to favor, printed with tiny roses that looked more like drops of blood in the dim light filtering through heavy curtains. Family portraits lined the walls, generations of Thornfields staring down with expressions that ranged from disapproving to openly hostile. I recognized my grandfather, Margaret's brother, looking stern and uncomfortable in his military uniform. There was Harold in his younger days, handsome and scholarly, before whatever had happened in Peru changed everything. Moving through the parlor, I ran my fingers along the spine of dusty books, leather-bound volumes of poetry, philosophy, and what appeared to be several texts on archaeology and ancient civilizations. The collection of silver-framed photographs that covered the mantelpiece told the story of Margaret and Harold's life together in carefully curated glimpses. Most showed them in their younger days, him tall and scholarly with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, her beautiful in that sharp aristocratic way that could cut glass. Harold reading by the fireplace, Margaret tending her rose garden, the two of them at dinner parties surrounded by colleagues from the university where Harold taught. But there were gaps in the timeline. Empty spaces where photos should have been, as if someone had carefully curated which memories deserved to survive. The pictures stopped abruptly around 1967, the year Harold brought back that final artifact from his expedition. After that, only formal portraits of Margaret alone, her smile growing more strained and distant with each passing year until it disappeared entirely. The lawyer had explained that I was Margaret's sole heir. No children, no other living relatives. Just me, her nephew, inheriting a house worth more than my annual salary and whatever secrets lay within its walls. Margaret and I hadn't been close. Our relationship was built on obligatory holiday visits and birthday cards signed with formal affection. She had always been the mysterious relative, the one who lived alone in the big house and never quite explained why she wore gloves to family gatherings, why she flinched when children tried to hug her, why she always made excuses to leave early. But she had always treated me with a distant kindness, like someone caring for a neighbor's cat. She would ask about my job, my girlfriend, my plans for the future, but there was always something guarded in her eyes, as if she was constantly calculating the safest distance to maintain between us. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step creaking a different note in an off-key symphony. The banister was smooth mahogany, worn by decades of hands sliding along its surface, and I found myself wondering how many of those hands had belonged to people whose names were now written on yellowed tags in a chest I hadn't yet discovered. The bedrooms were pristine, Beds made with military precision, everything in its designated place. Margaret's room still smelled faintly of her perfume, something expensive and floral that seemed to cling to the wallpaper itself. Her vanity table was arranged with the same meticulous care she had applied to everything else. Silver brush and comb set, a few tasteful pieces of jewelry, and a hand mirror that seemed to reflect shadows even when no one was standing in front of it. I opened her wardrobe, finding rows of conservative dresses and practical shoes, all in muted colors that wouldn't draw attention. But at the back, wrapped in tissue paper, I found something unexpected. A wedding dress, yellowed with age but still beautiful, still waiting for a ceremony that would never come. A note pinned to the bodice read, "For my wedding to Harold, September 1969. We never made it that far." The guest bedroom contained Harold's belongings, preserved like a shrine to a man who had been missing for over 50 years. His pipe still sat on the nightstand next to a book of Peruvian folklore marked with dozens of bookmarks. His clothes hung in the closet, smelling faintly of tobacco and old books. On his desk, I found stacks of correspondence with colleagues, research notes in his careful handwriting, and several maps of South America, with locations marked in red ink. One letter, dated just 2 weeks before his disappearance, caught my attention. "My dear Margaret," it read, "I know you're worried about this expedition, but I assure you the artifact we've discovered is quite safe. The locals are superstitious, of course. They speak of curses and trapped spirits, but I've examined it thoroughly and found no evidence of anything more dangerous than cultural significance. The university is very excited about the potential discoveries. We may have found something that rewrites our understanding of pre-Columbian spiritual practices. I'll be home by Christmas with stories that will amaze you. All my love, Harold." Poor Harold. So confident in his rational, scientific worldview. So unprepared for the reality of what he had brought home. But it was the narrow staircase at the end of the hall that drew my attention. The one leading to the attic. The one I had been forbidden to climb as a child. The memory came flooding back as I stood at the bottom of those stairs. I had been 8 years old, visiting for Thanksgiving, bored and looking for adventure in the way that only children can be. The rest of the adults were in the parlor discussing politics and sipping brandy, and I had slipped away to explore the house's more interesting corners. "Never go up there," Margaret had told me when she caught me with my foot on the bottom step. Her voice had been different then, not angry but afraid, desperately, genuinely afraid. "There are things in the attic that are better left undisturbed. Promise me, Thomas. Promise me you'll never open the chest up there." The chest. Even at 8 years old, I had been intrigued by the mystery of it. What could be so dangerous about a chest in an old woman's attic? "What's in it?" I had asked, with the thoughtless curiosity of childhood. Margaret had knelt down to my level, her hands gripping my shoulders tight enough to hurt. Her eyes, usually so composed and controlled, had been wild with something that looked like panic. "Promise me," she had repeated, her voice almost a whisper. "Promise me you'll never open it. There are things in this world that are meant to stay hidden, Thomas. Things that change you just by knowing about them. The chest in the attic is one of those things." I had promised, of course. 8-year-olds promise anything to avoid that look in an adult's eyes. The look that says they've seen something that would give you nightmares for years. But I wasn't 8 anymore. I was 34, a grown man with a mortgage and a receding hairline, and a healthy skepticism about family ghost stories. The attic door was unlocked. I flicked on the light switch, surprised when a bare bulb actually illuminated the space above. The attic was larger than I had expected, running the full length of the house. Exposed beams created a geometric pattern of shadows overhead, and the air was thick with dust motes that danced in the weak light like microscopic spirits. Boxes were stacked along the walls, labeled in Margaret's precise handwriting. Christmas decorations, Harold's books, wedding china, mother's things, tax records, 1960, 1970. Normal things, disappointing things, if I was being honest. I had half expected to find something immediately ominous, but this looked like any other old woman's attic, a repository for memories and seasonal items that were too valuable to throw away, but not useful enough to keep downstairs. I began exploring methodically, opening boxes and examining their contents. The Christmas decorations were exactly what you'd expect. Glass ornaments carefully wrapped in tissue paper, strings of lights that probably hadn't worked since the Eisenhower administration, and a small artificial tree that looked like it had seen better decades. Harold's books were academic texts, mostly about South American archaeology and anthropology, with extensive notes in the margins. Margaret's mother's things were the sorts of items that every family accumulates. China patterns that go out of style, jewelry that was fashionable in the 1940s, photo albums documenting a life that meant everything to someone and nothing to anyone else. But there, in the far corner, partially hidden behind a stack of Harold's expedition equipment, sat the chest. It was beautiful in the way that antiques are beautiful, all dark wood and brass fittings, with intricate carvings along the sides that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. The wood looked like mahogany, but darker, richer, with a grain pattern that resembled flowing water or billowing smoke. The brass was green with verdigris, but still functional, still solid. The chest was maybe 4 feet long and 2 feet wide, the perfect size for storing linens or out-of-season clothes, or secrets. It definitely looked old enough to hold secrets. The carvings were what caught my attention. They weren't decorative in the way that Victorian furniture often was. They seemed to tell a story or maybe issue a warning. Human figures danced around the edges, but their poses were wrong somehow. Their limbs bent at unnatural angles, their faces caught in expressions of ecstasy or terror. Between the figures were symbols I didn't recognize, spirals and geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they were trying to pull my vision into their depths. I approached it slowly, Margaret's warning echoing in my mind. The brass lock was corroded green with age, but when I tested it, the mechanism moved freely. Someone had been maintaining it. Someone had been visiting this chest regularly, keeping it functional despite the decades of disuse. The wood felt warm under my palms, which should have been impossible in the drafty attic. But there it was, a subtle heat radiating from within, as if something inside was generating its own warmth. I pressed my ear to the lid and could have sworn I heard something. Not quite music, not quite breathing. A rhythm, a pulse, like a heartbeat, but slower, deeper, more patient than any human heart. I should have walked away then. Should have remembered my promise to Margaret. Should have listened to the voice in my head that was screaming warnings about things better left undisturbed. But curiosity is a powerful force, and I had come too far to turn back now. I lifted the lid. The smell hit me first. That same metallic odor from downstairs, but stronger now. Old pennies and iron and something organic that made my stomach turn. Copper and decay and something else. Something I couldn't identify, but that triggered every primitive alarm in my brain. Inside the chest, nestled in what looked like black velvet that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, were dozens of small objects. Jewelry mostly. Rings and necklaces and brooches, all of them tarnished and old, but not random pieces. Each one was arranged with careful precision, as if this were a museum display rather than a storage container. And each one was accompanied by a small yellowed tag tied with black ribbon. I picked up a silver locket, heavy in my palm. The silver was blackened with age, but I could still make out delicate engravings around the edges, roses and vines, the sort of romantic motifs that were popular in the early 20th century. The tag tied to its chain made my blood run cold. Eleanor Morrison, 1950-1968, loved dancing, afraid of thunderstorms, never saw her 19th birthday, taken during the Christmas Eve storm when she came to help with preparations. She was trying to leave when it happened. My hands began to shake. I set the locket down carefully and picked up a man's wedding ring, the gold worn thin by years of wear. The inscription inside was too faded to read, but the tag was clear enough. David Walsh, 1935-1978, carpenter, left behind twin daughters, Sarah and Susan. Disappeared while walking home from Murphy's Tavern after celebrating his promotion. He fought harder than most. Another tag, another name, another story cut short. Patricia Chin, 1942-1987, schoolteacher at Millbrook Elementary, collected pressed flowers and taught Sunday school, found in Millbrook Forest with no memory of how she got there. The flowers in her hands were still fresh. Timothy Parker, 1955-1971, 16 years old, captain of the debate team, wanted to be a lawyer like his father. Parents still believe he ran away to California. He didn't. There were dozens of them, dozens of people, all with death dates that clustered around the late 1960s and continued through the 1970s, 1980s, and into the 1990s. Each tag told a story of a life interrupted, a future that would never come to pass. The earliest death was from 1968, just 1 year after Harold had brought the artifact home. At the bottom of the chest, wrapped in oiled cloth that crackled when I touched it, was a leather journal. The cover was worn smooth from handling, and the pages inside were filled with Margaret's careful script. But this wasn't her usual precise handwriting. These words seemed to crawl across the page like insects, urgent and desperate, as if she had been writing while her hands shook. Harold found it in Peru. The first entry read, dated October 15th, 1967. He wouldn't tell me exactly where, said the locals had warnings about the place. Cursed ground, they called it. A temple complex that the Spanish missionaries tried to destroy but couldn't quite manage. Harold never believed in curses. He thought they were just primitive superstitions, stories told by people who didn't understand the science behind the artifacts. He brought it home as a wedding gift, said it was pre-Columbian, probably used for religious ceremonies. How was he supposed to know what kind of ceremonies? I flipped through pages of entries, each one more disturbing than the last. Margaret had documented everything with the methodical precision of a scientist conducting an experiment she desperately wanted to fail. October 22nd, 1967. The artifact is beautiful in a way that makes my teeth ache. Harold has it displayed in his study, and sometimes I catch him just staring at it for hours. When I ask him what he's thinking about, he says he's trying to understand the symbols carved into its surface. He thinks they might be a form of early writing, or perhaps astronomical calculations. I think they're something else entirely. I think they're instructions. November 3rd, 1967. The dream started last week. In them, I'm standing in a vast underground chamber filled with stone tables, and on each table is a body preserved in some way I don't understand. They're not dead exactly. Their eyes move. They try to speak, and there's something moving between the tables, something that feeds on whatever keeps them in that state between life and death. I wake up with the taste of copper in my mouth. November 18th, 1967. Mrs. Henderson came for tea today. She's been my neighbor for 15 years. A sweet woman who brings me vegetables from her garden and always remembers my birthday. She had a heart attack while we were discussing her granddaughter's wedding plans. I was holding her hand when she passed, trying to comfort her, and I felt it, like electricity running up my arm, something warm and vital flowing from her into me. When I touched the artifact afterward, I could see her. Not a ghost, not a memory. Her, actually her, preserved somehow inside the stone, aware and terrified and trying to speak. Trapped. My mouth went dry. I looked back at the jewelry in the chest, understanding now that these weren't keepsakes or mementos. They were containers. Prisons. November 25th, 1967. I can't stop thinking about Mrs. Henderson. The artifact pulses now when I'm near it, warm to the touch, almost eager. And I can feel something inside me that wasn't there before. A hunger I don't understand. Harold thinks I'm grieving Mrs. Henderson's death, but the truth is so much worse. I took something from her when she died, and now I want more. Need more. The artifact has changed me, made me into something that feeds on the moment of death, that can trap souls before they have a chance to move on to whatever comes next. December 8th, 1967. I understand now how it works. The artifact doesn't just preserve souls, it teaches. Every time someone dies near it, every time I accidentally feed on their life force, I learn more about what I've become. The people I've trapped aren't suffering in the way we understand suffering. Time doesn't exist for them the way it does for us. They exist in a moment between heartbeats, aware but unchanging, experiencing an eternal instant of whatever they were feeling when they died. For most of them, it's confusion. For some, it's fear. For a few, it's peace. They don't age, don't hunger, don't feel physical pain, but they know they're trapped, and they know someone put them there. December 15th, 1967. Harold is asking too many questions. He found me in the parlor last night, holding Mrs. Henderson's brooch, the one she was wearing when she died. I had taken it from her body before the undertaker arrived, and somehow her essence had followed it, bound itself to the silver and turquoise she had loved so much. Harold saw the look on my face when I was holding it, saw the way my eyes rolled back and my breathing changed. I could tell he was starting to understand that his wife had become something else, something that needed to feed on death to survive. January 3rd, 1968. The hunger is getting stronger. I can feel it when people are near death, smell it on them like a perfume. Mr. Garrett from the grocery store has maybe a month left. His heart is failing, though he doesn't know it yet. The postman's wife is developing something in her lungs that will kill her by spring. And young Timothy Parker, who delivers our newspaper every morning, has no idea that he'll be dead before his 17th birthday. The knowledge comes to me unbidden, unwanted, but impossible to ignore. January 20th, 1968. Harold threatened to call the police today. He found me in the study with the artifact, and he could see what I was becoming. The thing is, I don't want to hurt people. The hunger isn't malicious, it's just hungry. But I can't control when it feeds. Every handshake, every hug, every casual contact with someone near death becomes an opportunity for the thing inside me to take what it wants. And once I've taken from someone, once I've trapped their soul, I need somewhere to put it. Objects work best. Things that have emotional significance, that carry memories and meaning. Wedding rings, jewelry passed down through generations. Items that already have a connection to the person's life force. February 14th, 1968. Eleanor Morrison died today. She was only 18, visiting to help with Valentine's Day preparations. A thunderstorm hit while she was here, and she was terrified. Always had been afraid of storms since she was a child. During a particularly loud clap of thunder, her heart just stopped. Fear can kill, I've learned. I was holding her hand, trying to comfort her when I felt the pull as her soul tried to leave her body. I couldn't stop myself from reaching out, from taking what was offered. Her locket was around her neck, a gift from her grandmother, and her essence flowed into it like water finding its level. Harold wasn't here to see it happen, but when he returned from the university, he knew something had changed. March 10th, 1968. Timothy Parker died today, hit by a car while delivering newspapers in the early morning fog. I was there when it happened, walking past the accident, and I felt the pull as his soul tried to leave his body. I couldn't stop myself from reaching out, from taking what was offered. His class ring was in his pocket, a symbol of his hopes for the future, and his essence flowed into it like water finding its level. Harold saw me pocket the ring while the ambulance workers were trying to revive Timothy's body. He knows what I did. He knows what I am. The entries continued for months, documenting Margaret's growing horror at what she had become and Harold's increasing desperation to find a way to help her. He had tried everything, consulting with colleagues who specialized in South American folklore, reaching out to religious leaders, even attempting to contact the shamans who had originally warned him about the artifact. But nothing worked. The curse, if that's what it was, had taken root too deeply. June 10th, 1968. Harold tried to destroy the artifact last night. Took a hammer to it, thinking he could smash it to pieces and end this nightmare. But you can't destroy something that exists outside our understanding of reality. The artifact absorbed the impact like a sponge absorbing water, and the feedback knocked Harold unconscious. When he woke up, he was different, distant. He kept talking about needing to go back to Peru, said he could hear voices calling him from the dig site. This morning I found him packing his expedition gear. He won't listen to reason. The artifact has marked him, and now it's pulling him back to where it came from. Harold's disappearance suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't vanished during an expedition. He had been compelled to return to the source of their nightmare, drawn back like a moth to a flame that would consume him. June 15th, 1968. Harold left this morning. I begged him not to go, told him we could find another way, but he said the voices were too strong. He said the artifact wanted to go home and it was using him to get there. I think I know what's really happening. I think Harold has become like me, changed by his contact with the artifact, and now he's being called back to feed the source of our curse. I don't think I'll ever see him again. July 1st, 1968. I've hidden the artifact where Harold will never find it, even if he comes back. Somewhere safe, where it can't influence anyone else. But I can still feel its pull, still crave the power it gave me. The people I've collected, Eleanor Morrison, David Walsh, Patricia Chen, Timothy Parker, and all the others, they're not suffering in the way we understand suffering. They exist in a moment between heartbeats, aware but unchanging. Some days I tell myself that's better than death. Some days I almost believe it. The next entries were sporadic, years apart, documenting Margaret's slow descent into isolated madness. She had stopped taking souls as frequently after Harold's disappearance, but she couldn't completely resist the hunger when opportunities presented themselves. They were her companions now, her collection of frozen moments and interrupted lives. December 25th, 1975. Christmas alone again. I spoke with Eleanor Morrison today, held her locket and felt her consciousness brush against mine. She's still 18, still afraid of thunderstorms, still remembering the Valentine's Day preparations that became her last day. She's not angry with me, which somehow makes it worse. She understands that I didn't choose this, that I'm as much a victim as she is, but understanding doesn't change the fact that she's trapped, because of what I've become. April 8, 1982. A young man came to the door today, asking about Harold. He's writing a book about missing archaeologists, and someone had given him Harold's name. I told him Harold had died in Peru, which isn't exactly a lie. The man Harold was when he left me certainly died there. Whether anything of him survived the journey back to that cursed temple complex, I'll never know. October 31st, 1989. Halloween. How appropriate. I can feel my strength failing, my connection to the artifact weakening. The hunger is still there, but it's become more of an ache than a driving need. Maybe when I die, the curse will die with me. Maybe the souls I've trapped will finally be free to move on. Or maybe they'll just fade away into nothing, which might be its own kind of mercy. November 15th, 1995. Thomas came to visit today. He's grown into such a kind man. Reminds me of Harold at that age. Curious and gentle and completely unprepared for the darkness that exists in this world. I almost told him about the chest, about what I've done. But what would be the point? Soon I'll be gone, and my secrets will die with me. The souls in the jewelry will fade eventually, I think, or hope. I've stopped being able to tell the difference. June 3rd, 2003. I've been having the dreams again. The underground chamber, the stone tables, the preserved bodies that aren't quite dead. But now I recognize some of the faces. They're mine. Eleanor, David, Patricia, Timothy, all the others. And there's something moving between the tables. Something that looks like me but isn't me. Something that feeds on the energy that keeps them suspended between life and death. I think I understand now what I really am. Not a killer, not exactly. A gardener, cultivating a crop I never wanted to plant. January 1st, 2010. The new millennium has come and gone, and I'm still here, still keeping my terrible garden. I've learned to live with the knowledge of what I've done, learned to find peace in the company of the dead. They talk to me sometimes when I hold their containers. Eleanor tells me about the dances she would have attended. David describes the house he was building for his family. Patricia recites poetry her students wrote. They're not suffering. That's what I tell myself. They're just paused. The final entries were more recent, written in Margaret's increasingly shaky handwriting as age took its toll. March 17th, 2020. The world has changed so much. There's a plague now, people dying by the thousands, and I can feel every death like a physical blow. The artifact stirs in its hiding place, hungry for all the fear and suffering, but I'm too old now to be its instrument. Too tired. Maybe that's a blessing. Maybe this is how the curse finally ends, not with violence or dramatic confrontation, but with simple human exhaustion. August 4th, 2022. Thomas called today. He's doing well, settled in his life, happy in the way that people can be when they don't know what darkness exists in the world. I wanted to warn him about what he might inherit when I'm gone. But how do you explain something like this? How do you tell someone you love that their family legacy is built on trapped souls and ancient hungers? Better to let him discover it himself if he must. Better to hope he has the strength to do what I never could. The final entry was dated just 3 months ago. April 15th, 2023. I can feel the end coming. My heart is failing, just like Mrs. Henderson's did all those years ago. I wonder if someone will be there to hold my hand when I go. If someone will accidentally take my soul the way I took hers. Maybe that would be fitting. Maybe that would be justice. The artifact is still hidden where Harold will never find it. Thomas will inherit this house, and if he's anything like his uncle, his curiosity will eventually lead him to the chest. I've left instructions, or warnings, I suppose. Whether he heeds them or ignores them will determine whether this nightmare finally ends or finds a new generation to torment. I set down the journal with shaking hands. Margaret hadn't been a monster. She had been a victim, infected by something ancient and hungry that had turned her into a predator against her will. But that didn't change what she had done. Didn't change the fact that dozens of people had vanished from the town over the decades, their families never knowing what had happened to them. And now I was alone in an attic with their trapped souls trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do about it. I began examining the jewelry more carefully, looking for patterns or clues about how Margaret had managed to bind these people's essences to physical objects. Each piece was unique, wedding rings that had been worn for decades, class rings that represented hopes and dreams, necklaces with religious pendants that had provided comfort in times of need, charm bracelets heavy with personal significance, items that had meant something to their owners, that carried emotional weight and personal history. The locket I had first examined was warm to the touch, warmer than the others. When I held it up to the light, I could see a hairline crack running along one edge. Age, maybe, or the strain of containing something it was never meant to hold. That's when I heard it. A whisper, so faint I almost convinced myself it was just the wind through the eaves. But as I held the locket closer, the sound became clearer. A voice, young and feminine, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. Eleanor Morrison, trying to communicate from her silver prison. "Help," the voice whispered, barely audible. "Please. So tired. So long." I nearly dropped the locket in shock. Whatever Margaret had done, these people were still conscious, still aware. They had been trapped for decades, suspended in an endless moment of confusion and fear. I had to find a way to free them. I searched through Harold's boxes, looking for anything that might explain how the artifact worked or how its effects could be reversed. Most of his belongings were typical academic materials, research notes written in his precise handwriting, photographs of dig sites showing weathered stone structures emerging from jungle overgrowth, correspondence with colleagues at universities around the world. But buried at the bottom of one box, wrapped in oiled leather that crackled when I touched it, I found a folder marked Huacas del Sol, Personal Research. Inside were photocopies of journal entries written in Spanish, along with Harold's English translations. The original author had been a missionary named Father Rodriguez, who had encountered something similar in the Peruvian highlands in 1823. The locals speak of a place where the dead do not rest, Harold had translated in his careful script, where shamans once bound the spirits of enemies to prevent their journey to the afterlife. They say the sacred objects from this place carry the hunger of the earth itself, the need to preserve what should be allowed to pass. I have seen such an object, and I believe their warnings. It speaks to something primitive in the human soul, the fear of endings, the desire to hold on to what we love, even when love becomes possession. Father Rodriguez had documented his own encounter with one of these cursed artifacts in disturbing detail. Like Harold and Margaret, he had initially dismissed the local warnings as superstition. Like them, he had learned too late that some superstitions exist because they're true. The object came into my possession through a dying conquistador, Rodriguez had written, a man named Vasquez who claimed to have looted it from a temple complex deep in the mountains. He died in my arms, begging forgiveness for what he had done, what he had brought back to the world of the living. I thought his ravings were the product of fever and guilt, but when I touched the artifact he had carried, I felt something move inside it, something that had once been human. Rodriguez had tried to destroy the object he found, but like Harold, he had failed. The artifact had absorbed his attempts at destruction, fed on his anger and frustration, grown stronger with each blow. Instead, he had been forced to find another solution. I consulted with the village shaman, an old woman named Chuya, who claimed her grandmother had been alive when the Spanish first arrived. Rodriguez continued. She told me stories that chilled my blood, tales of priests who had learned to trap souls, to prevent their enemies from finding peace in death. The artifacts were weapons, she said, designed to create an army of the undead that could be called upon in times of war. But the shamans who created them had not anticipated the Spanish conquest, had not realized that their soul traps would outlive the civilization that created them. But at the end of the folder was something more useful, a ritual Rodriguez had learned from Chuya before sealing away the cursed artifact. Not a destruction ritual, but a release ritual, a way to let the trapped souls move on to whatever came next. The souls cannot be freed by force, Rodriguez had written. They must be given permission to leave, acknowledged as individuals rather than possessions. The person performing the ritual must touch the object containing the soul and speak their name. Tell them they are forgiven for whatever guilt they carry. Remind them that death is not an ending, but a transition. Most importantly, they must be told that they are free to go, free to find the peace that was denied to them. The instructions were simple, almost disappointingly so. Each bound soul had to be released individually, acknowledged and given permission to go. The person performing the ritual had to understand that they were not commanding the souls to leave, but offering them a choice they had been denied. It sounded like wishful thinking, but I didn't have any better options. I started with Eleanor Morrison's locket, holding it in both hands and feeling the warmth pulse against my palms like a tiny heartbeat. "Eleanor Morrison," I said aloud, my voice shaking slightly. "I know you've been trapped here for too long. I know you're tired and confused and afraid, but Margaret is gone now, and the thing that bound you to this place has no power over you anymore. You don't have to stay. You're free to go. You're free to find whatever peace waits beyond this moment. The locket grew warmer, almost hot, and for a moment I felt something brush against my consciousness. Gratitude, relief, and then a sense of motion, of something moving away at tremendous speed. The metal cooled in my hands and the whisper faded to nothing. One down, dozens to go. I worked through the night, releasing soul after soul. Each one was different. Some went quietly, dissolving into whatever lay beyond with barely a whisper of acknowledgement. Others seemed to struggle against the freedom I was offering, confused by decades of imprisonment, uncertain whether this was another trick or trap. A few whispered words of thanks before departing, messages of forgiveness or love that I promised to carry, even though I had no idea how to fulfill that promise. David Walsh took the longest to convince. His wedding ring pulsed with stubborn energy, and I could feel his reluctance to leave behind the world where his daughters lived. They're grown now, I told him, holding his ring and feeling the weight of his presence. Sarah and Susan, they've lived full lives, had children of their own. They never forgot you, but they found peace with your absence. You don't need to guard them anymore. You can let go. When he finally departed, the ring grew so hot I almost dropped it, and for just a moment I felt an overwhelming sense of paternal love and pride before it faded into peaceful silence. Patricia Chen was gentler, her essence flowing away like a sigh of relief when I spoke her name and told her that her students had grown up, that some of them had become teachers themselves, carrying forward her love of learning and pressed flowers. The sun was rising by the time I reached the last piece of jewelry, a simple gold wedding band that belonged to someone named Michael Torres. According to his tag, he had been a postal worker who disappeared in 1989. Leaving behind a pregnant wife and a dog named Charlie. But when I tried to release Michael's soul, nothing happened. The ring remained warm, the whispers continued, and I felt no sense of departure. I repeated the ritual, spoke his name louder, pleaded with him to accept his freedom. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the other box. It was smaller than the chest, hidden behind a stack of Harold's expedition equipment. The wood was the same dark material as the chest, carved with similar symbols that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Inside, wrapped in the same black velvet that absorbed light, was the artifact itself. It was beautiful and terrible in the way that dangerous things often are. A carved stone disc about the size of a dinner plate, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when observed. The stone was warm to the touch, pulsing with that same rhythm I had heard earlier, and it radiated a hunger that made my teeth ache and my vision blur around the edges. This was what had turned Margaret into a killer. This was the source of all the trapped souls and all the grief it had caused. And looking at it, I understood why Michael Torres couldn't leave. The artifact was still active, still feeding, and as long as it existed, it would continue to create new prisons for the unlucky souls who crossed its path. I thought about Harold's failed attempt to destroy it, about Father Rodriguez's decision to bury it in consecrated ground. But I also thought about Margaret's final journal entry, about her hope that the souls would fade eventually when she was gone. She had been wrong about that. Time didn't touch what was trapped in the artifact's influence, but maybe distance would work differently. As I stared at the carved stone, I began to understand something else. The artifact wasn't just a soul trap, it was a teacher. Every time it claimed a victim, every time someone died in its presence, it learned from them. It absorbed not just their life force, but their knowledge, their memories, their understanding of the world. Margaret had thought she was the one in control, but in reality, she had been nothing more than a tool, a way for the artifact to expand its collection. And now it was trying to do the same thing to me. I could feel it whispering at the edges of my consciousness, suggesting that the trapped souls were actually better off in their preserved state. What was death, after all, but an ending? What was wrong with preserving people at their peak, keeping them safe from the decay and suffering that awaited all living things? Wouldn't it be kinder to spare them the pain of loss, of aging, of watching everything they loved crumble into dust? For a moment, the arguments almost made sense, but then I thought about Eleanor Morrison, trapped at 18 forever, never able to grow and change and become the person she might have been. David Walsh, forever separated from the daughters he loved, unable to watch them grow up and start families of their own. Patricia Chen, her love of teaching and learning frozen in time, never able to inspire new generations of students. The artifact wasn't preserving these people, it was stealing their futures. I gathered up all the empty jewelry, the discharged containers that had once held human souls, and placed them back in the chest. Then I wrapped the artifact in its cloth and tucked it under my arm. I was probably making the biggest mistake of my life, but I couldn't think of any other options. The drive to the coast took 3 hours, the artifact pulsing against my side like a second heartbeat. I could feel it trying to influence me, whispering suggestions about the people I passed on the highway. The clerk at the gas station who was developing lung cancer, the jogger running along the beach path who had maybe 6 months before his heart gave out, the family at the rest stop whose youngest child would die in a car accident before her 10th birthday. The knowledge came unbidden, unwanted, but impossible to ignore. This was how Margaret had lived for decades, knowing when and how people would die, feeling the constant temptation to reach out and take what was offered before death could claim it naturally. But I made it to the pier just as the sun reached its zenith. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, deep blue and indifferent to human suffering. Perfect. I pulled the artifact from its wrapping one last time, feeling its weight in my hands. The symbols on its surface were moving faster now, swirling in patterns that made my eyes water. It knew what I was planning, and it was afraid. Good. Let it be afraid. This is for Eleanor Morrison, I said, drawing back my arm. For David Walsh and Patricia Chen and Timothy Parker and all the others. For Margaret and Harold, who never deserved what you did to them. For every soul you've trapped, every future you've stolen, every family you've destroyed with your endless, selfish hunger. I hurled the artifact as far as I could, watching it arc through the air before disappearing into the waves with a splash that seemed too small for something so significant. For a moment, I thought I heard screaming. Not human screaming, but the sound of something ancient and hungry being denied its food. The water where it had landed began to bubble and churn, as if the ocean itself was rejecting what I had thrown into it. Then there was only the sound of waves and seagulls, and the warm weight of Michael Torres's wedding ring in my pocket as his soul finally departed for whatever came next. I drove home in silence, windows down, breathing in the salt air and trying to convince myself that I had done the right thing. The artifact was gone, sunk to the bottom of the ocean where it couldn't hurt anyone else. The souls were free. Margaret's nightmare was finally over. But as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The skin on my hands was warm, warmer than it should have been, and when I accidentally brushed against my neighbor's arm as he waved hello, I felt it, that electric tingle Margaret had described, that hunger for something I couldn't name. The artifact was gone, but its influence wasn't. It had touched me, changed me, made me into something that would forever walk the line between life and death. I thought about Margaret's decades of isolation, her careful avoidance of human contact, the way she had lived alone with her terrible hunger. Now I understood why she had never tried to find someone to take her burden. Because it wasn't really a burden you could pass on. It was a curse you could only share. I went inside and locked the door, drew the curtains closed, and began making a list of precautions I would need to take. No more handshakes, no more hugs, no more casual human contact that might trigger whatever I was becoming. I would need to buy gloves, lots of gloves. I would need to learn to keep my distance from people, to find excuses for avoiding physical contact. I would need to become Margaret. The chest in her attic was empty now, but I had a feeling it wouldn't stay that way forever. Some hungers, once awakened, can never truly be satisfied, and I was already feeling the pull, the need to touch and take and preserve. Mrs. Patterson next door was coughing more than usual lately. She probably didn't know yet that the spot on her lung was malignant, that she had maybe 3 months before the cancer spread too far to treat. The knowledge came to me unbidden, along with the terrible understanding that all I would need to do was shake her hand when the time came, and her essence would flow into whatever object she held dear. And somewhere in the depths of the Pacific Ocean, an ancient artifact sits in the darkness, waiting for the currents to carry it to a new shore, where new hands might find it and new souls might learn that some family warnings should never be ignored. Margaret tried to warn me. She tried to keep me away from the chest, away from the truth about what our family had become. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and secrets have a way of demanding to be discovered. Now I know what she was hiding. Now I understand why she spent 40 years alone in that house, afraid to touch another living soul. And now I have to figure out how to live with that same curse, that same terrible knowledge, for whatever time I have left. The neighbors probably think I'm becoming a recluse. They wave when they see me checking the mail, but they don't understand why I always wear gloves now. why I step back when they get too close. They don't know about the warmth in my hands or the hunger that grows stronger every day. They don't know that I can feel their deaths approaching like distant thunder, or that part of me, a part that grows larger with each passing day, wants to reach out and preserve them before time can take what I might save. Margaret left me more than just a house. She left me a legacy written in trapped souls and whispered warnings, a family tradition that stretches back to a missionary in the Peruvian highlands and forward to whatever poor soul might find that artifact when the ocean finally gives up its secret. But for now, it's my burden to bear, my hunger to resist, my choice whether to become the monster that Margaret never wanted to be, or to find some way to break a cycle that has already claimed too many lives. The chest in the attic is empty, but the warning remains. Some things are better left undisturbed. Some family secrets should stay buried. And some hungers, once awakened, can only be satisfied by feeding on what we should protect. Margaret knew this. Harold learned it too late. And now it's my turn to decide what kind of person I want to be. The one who opens the chest, or the one who finds the strength to keep it closed forever. The choice, as they say, is mine. But the hunger is patient, and the curse is strong, and somewhere in the darkness, I can still hear the whispers of souls who thought they had finally found peace. Some stories, it seems, never really end. They just find new voices to tell them, new hands to carry them forward, new lives to consume in their endless, hungry darkness. Welcome to my family's legacy. Welcome to the Ghastly Journal's most personal tale. And remember, when someone warns you never to open something, maybe you should listen. Maybe they know exactly what they're talking about. Maybe they're trying to save you from becoming something you never wanted to be. Margaret tried to save me. I failed to save myself. But maybe, just maybe, I can save whoever comes next. The chest is empty now, but the curse remains. And somewhere in the depths of the ocean, an ancient hunger waits for its chance to surface once again.